Okay, guys, I guess I'll just get us gradually started up here now that we're pretty much to 12:45. So thanks everybody for being here present at this meeting. Um, what I'm going to do is this. So I think that the playback and the live chat replay is better in YouTube, but I want to give people the choice, to stay with Zoom if they want. So you can stay right here, and I'm going to put all the comments in this Zoom chat. But if anybody likes the user interface or any other things having to do with that YouTube format, if you like it better, then you can also simply click this link. And the stream is running live right now on both. So I just kind of give you your option there in terms of which one that you'd rather interact with me on and your other classmates. So when I share the recorded lectures later, they're going to be from the YouTube version. But while we're here in the class, I'm going to continue to interact with you through Zoom. So that's pretty much it, everybody. Hopefully that's all clear and well. Now, for the schedule that we have this week and today, it's pretty straightforward. Next week, a week from now, on the 19th, we're going to have the midterm exam. And so today we're going to try to finish up some of our leftover notes from chapter 4, the chapter on knowledge and the limits of human knowledge. And then Thursday, next class, we'll make sure to cover all of the topics on our study guide in good detail. Let me ask a question to those that are here for the moment. Did some of you guys notice the study guide that I mailed out? Yeah, did anybody notice? Just let me go. Okay, thank you, Armand and Kay and the others. Cool, so that study guide, just keep an eye on it, and you can use it to prepare for your midterm, and of course, we're going to use it on Thursday when we have the big review session. So if you haven't yet gone back to Canvas, make sure to check on those announcements that I've posted, and you'll definitely see the study guide there from the last announcement that I sent, I think, on Friday. All right, then. So we just have to get through some more notes right now on Chapter 4, and that's the first major order of business. Good to see, Sky, that you've already started working on it, and I'm glad that you guys have it. So yeah, you can go ahead and start filling in the information for all the different topics and items in that study guide, and that'll definitely have you well prepared for the midterm next week. Okay, so let's jump back into Chapter 4. And like I say, I'm giving students the option of whichever format they prefer. So some people can watch this on YouTube, some can watch it on Zoom, and there's definitely going to be no loss to your user experience if you use one or the other. I'm going to bring together the best of both worlds. So I think that's going to be in everyone's best interests. All right. So then, let me just go back over some of the early information in Chapter 4. Some of this stuff we talked about last week on Thursday, so we'll have a little bit of review. And then when we finish off with the older material, we'll start to deliver some new notes for today. All right, now, the first thing I guess we talked about in this chapter, because it's all about knowledge and the limits of knowledge, is what's the basic definition of knowledge itself. So somebody let me know if you can remember that. Knowledge has to do with three major concepts. So what are the three key ingredients of knowledge? Okay, Armand, good. Knowledge, K, equals, you say JBT. It's a little bit different from the common convention. Usually I say JTB, justified true belief. Yeah, so let's put all those three in the full statement. Justification, truth, and belief. Good, Gabriel. Something that is known is something that is believed to be true, but there's also, don't forget, there's one more part, Gabriel. You're forgetting about the justification requirement. You got that? So it's not just that you believe it and it's true. That's required, yes, but it's not enough, because I could just be guessing right now that there's an even number of people in, I don't know, in the White House. But I don't know that for a fact. It's just something that I'm guessing. Nonetheless, if I believe it, it might be true, 50% chance that it is true. But for me to really know it, I would have to have more than just a lucky guess. I would also have to have some kind of justification evidence that backs it up. So knowledge is a justified true belief. If you believe something, that means you think it's true. And that's not enough, though. It has to also be correct. So it has to really be true. And on top of that, you also have to have some kind of justified evidence for believing it. So if you were, say, taking a multiple choice test and you filled in the wrong bubble, then you already know you're never going to get credit for knowing that answer. And the reason you don't know that answer is because you just gave the wrong one. So a false response cannot be credited as knowledge because it's just not true. So if somebody says that George Washington was the 10th president and that's the bubble they fill in, they didn't know the answer because that's not correct. So you also have to believe the correct answer, right? You have to believe the answer that is correct, and it has to be correct. But then you also have to have reasons. So suppose the person filled in that he was the first president, but they were just totally guessing. No, John, you don't have to join both. You can pick whichever one you want. So, John, Nian, you're on YouTube. That's cool. You can stay there, but it's up to you. So I'm just continuing to say some stuff about the definition of knowledge. It requires that you also have evidence. So if I was just guessing the right answer, like I say, I don't know, maybe it's that he was the first president, then I guess I would have had the answer correct, but I wouldn't have really known it because I couldn't have told you why that's true. So knowledge, actual knowledge, requires more than just lucky guesses. It requires a correct belief that's based on evidence. So that's the case. If you have any of those single conditions missing, like you don't believe something that's true, like you don't believe the world is round, then of course that person doesn't know that it's round because they don't even think it is. But just having a belief isn't enough because what if it's false? So you have to have a belief, have it be true, and then there's got to be evidence in place as well. The failure of any of the single conditions will make it so that you don't have knowledge. Now, after that, I guess we talked a little bit about what are the different schools of thought about where most knowledge comes from. Okay, not to worry, Foster. And if you have a better time with Zoom, feel free to go back to Zoom. They're both live right now. Yeah, so two views about where most human knowledge comes from. On the one hand, we have what's known as empiricism. And then on the other hand, we have what is called rationalism. So to the empiricists, most of our human knowledge comes from the five senses and the things that we can observe, either directly or indirectly, by means of the five senses. The five senses are sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. Brian, and to everybody else, some of you maybe are just arriving a moment later than the beginning of the meeting, so let me just say it clearly. You can go to either stream. It does not matter. It doesn't matter at all. You could be on Zoom or YouTube or both, and it just doesn't matter. Whichever one you want. They're both working, and I'm using them both. Okay, so back to the definition of empiricism. In empiricism, we say that most human knowledge comes from the five senses and observation. So like take the knowledge that we have that dinosaurs existed. This is based on the physical recovery of their remains, which we then observe using the five senses. Scientific knowledge is based on observing the world, collecting data, and then trying to explain the cause and effect relationships between things. So generally speaking, knowledge that is based on the five senses is empirically based, and that's what empiricists think most knowledge comes from. So perceptual and observable things. On the other hand, though, there's rationalism. And in rationalism, most human knowledge they think comes from just pure ideas, reason, and abstract thought. So think of the knowledge that you have about geometric shapes or mathematics or trigonometry or something. Those are things that you can know without having to actually physically touch, hear, taste, or smell anything, right? You can just think about the concepts in the mind alone. Anyway, I believe they're both complementary sources of knowledge, really. So perhaps it's not right, in my view, to prioritize one over the other. But they are both important to us, and we learn things from the things we can perceive, also from our just rational intuition and insight. Okay, generally speaking, knowledge requires justification, meaning that you have to have evidence. So evidence is simply something that can prove or disprove a claim. And there are some major sources of evidence that we are usually safe to rely on. Anybody remember some of those? Just checking in with you guys here in the chat. So some major sources of evidence could include things like what? Let me know whenever you're ready. Just hit me with something in the chat. Evidence could be derived from sources such as what? Experience, very good, yes. Gabriel, we're not talking about that, actually. Gabriel, you're talking about the library. That we'll get into that. Those are research resources, but this is a little bit before that part. So there's testimony, there's experience, there's memory, and then there's inference. And yes, it's true that experts sometimes provide good testimony, but testimony in general can just be from any source. So let me talk about those four sources of evidence. Experience is when you directly experience something firsthand yourself. So like witnessing an event gives you evidence that it happened because you were present and you saw it, or you felt it, or you heard it, or you smelled it, whatever the case may be. So you perceived it directly. Like I own a BMW car, but I guess you guys have never experienced me driving in it because, we haven't been together physically on campus. If you saw me in the car on campus, you'd be like, I saw him in that car, so that's how I know he has it. But right now, how do you know that I have it? Well, what's your evidence? It's just what I just told you. So it's testimony. So that takes us to the next thing. Testimonial evidence is evidence that's based on what people report to you, either in words that are written or spoken. So, you've learned from me that I have this BMW, and you're taking it off my testimony. So the evidence that you have is not like you seeing me in it, but just hearing me tell you. Testimony comes to us from a variety of sources. Sometimes it's just personal interactions with people. Sometimes it's media reports. Sometimes it's textbooks that we study, or it's words or statements that we hear from other individuals. So testimony gives evidence too. Of course, sometimes it can be incorrect or misleading, so we have to double check against other sources of evidence. There's also memory. Okay, so memory is a source of evidence that is based on the ability to recall things that you previously perceived or heard testimony about. Take, for example, the knowledge of what you ate for dinner last night. I know that I had pasta last night, and I know that not because I'm experiencing it anymore. The experience is over, it's in the past, nor is it because I've heard anyone tell me about it. Nobody needed to inform me about that fact. Instead, I just have a memory in the mind's eye, which I can just go back to and think about the events of last night. So memory allows us to retain previous information that we encountered either through our own direct experiences or through testimony, or some combination of them. And then there's also inference. So inference is when you draw a conclusion from another related set of facts. You might see a footprint at the murder scene, and you might infer on the basis of it that the killer was present. Doesn't mean you saw them, doesn't mean anyone told you. Of course, you don't have a memory to draw on, but instead you're just drawing a conclusion from inference. So you see lipstick on someone's collar, and you infer that someone kissed them on the collar. You didn't see that happen, and of course nobody told you. And since you didn't see it or hear from anybody, it's nothing that you could have remembered. But in this case, you're using your inference. You're drawing conclusions from other related information. Okay, and so overall, we use these different sources of evidence and we combine them to try and come up with justification for our beliefs. And that's what makes our beliefs capable, at least, of being knowledge. So after that, we talked a little bit about how false memories can sometimes happen. So memory, as we say, is usually reliable, but it's not perfect in 100% of cases. Sometimes we can think we remember something that did not happen, or at least didn't happen the same way we thought that it did. So with memory, false memories are possible, and it's one of the leading causes of mistaken convictions in court when you have false eyewitness testimony. When things are complicated, chaotic, and sometimes urgent, we don't always remember things properly. We can lose details, or we can confabulate others. So it helps us to sometimes check against our tendency to always trust the things that we think we remember, because sometimes memory can fail us. After that, we talked about what are some unreliable sources of evidence. And just to be clear, everybody, the reason I'm not typing these notes and stuff is because these notes were all discussed at the last lecture, and we had the type definitions in that one. So once we get past this review stuff, I'll definitely be back into adding some content into our chat. But I'm just brushing past it for the moment to keep us continuous with the last lecture. Anyway, though, there's two different unreliable sources of evidence that the textbook mentions next. It talks about hearsay and anecdote evidence. So hearsay is evidence that comes to you through testimony, but the problem is that it's not firsthand. Yeah, correct, Foster and Kelvin mentioning those. Hearsay is like information that has passed through many other people before it reaches you. So it's not even first or second hand. It's typically a few further links down in the chain of the transmission of the testimony. Think of the telephone game, perhaps, as an example of how information can easily get distorted or changed when it passes through even a limited number of people. So when there's no controls on the accurate transmission of info, then details can get removed or other ones added in. So hearsay is not necessarily the best source of evidence if you have anything else that you could rely on. Next up, there's anecdote. And anecdotal evidence is evidence that's just based on one person's personal experience. And therefore, it's typically not to be relied on because it might be skewed, biased, or it might not be representative of the mainstream of cases. So hearing from somebody that they smoked their whole life but never got any lung disease is not a very good basis of evidence to use to say cigarettes do not have harmful properties. Certainly, some people can be an outlier and they don't suffer the same kind of health impacts that others do with the same behavior. But if you just judged on one person's personal experience, you'd be poorly served because that's not the most strong evidence that you can have. So sometimes people use anecdotes instead of, like, I don't know, credible scientific or rational arguments. So we should do better than that. Don't just say, well, one person told me this is how it is, and so I'm just going to go with the one person's experience. Sometimes the one person's experience is yours too. You have a terrible time at a particular workplace, and you think that that's how everyone else's experience is too. It's just anecdotal, though. So sometimes we have to get out of our own headspace or take information from a variety of sources. So if your hearsay or anecdotal evidence is contradicted by a more widespread or reliable source, then you should set it aside in favor of the other. Okay, after that, I guess we all talked a little bit about what are different qualities that you can use to evaluate the testimony of experts. Okay, so anybody can tell me about some of those things? When it comes to experts, we might look at what different factors about them. You could look at their, yes, education, that's right, Armand, or perhaps their experience, yes, another one. And there's their accomplishments. Good, okay, good, Foster, Alan, Armand, and there is one more. Oh, the spelling's okay, not to worry. Yeah, so education, experience, accomplishments, and reputation. Accomplishments, I guess you got it, Armand. So let me go over those four. When you hear from an expert, the crab test is coming up in a moment, Gabriel. We're not quite there yet, but we will get there. So when you deal with experts or hear what they say or read what they write, you might want to judge their credibility by looking at these four metrics. Number one, the education. So how much education, from what institution, and on what topic or subject. Knowing how much education the person has can help set the bounds of how much trust you give to their so-called expertise. So the more education, generally the better. It also matters where it is from. Is this from a legitimate, credible institution or one of those funny sort of for-profit, schools that doesn't necessarily confer a valuable degree? So how much education, from where, and what topics? Next up, experience. So how much experience does the person have making judgments in the field with the education they've attained? Some people are highly educated but still new to their profession, and so that's another thing you can consider, how much experience working. Then there's accomplishments, which has to do with, does the person have any awards, honors, publications, or other titles that further give credibility to their testimony? So more accomplishments, more credibility. And then finally, reputation. How is this individual expert viewed by others in their field and their colleagues? Some people are viewed negatively by their fellow colleagues and peers, and so they're outside the mainstream of respected opinion within that field. So you should check with these four factors: what level of education, from where, what level of experience, do they have any accomplishments? If so, which ones and how many? And then what reputation, good or bad, do they have with other professionals in that same field? Okay, now after the talk of experts, I guess we talked about what are different research resources. And so now, if you want to throw some of those out there, Gabriel, I know you mentioned the library earlier. That's one of them. Does anybody remember some of the others? Places where you can go to do research if you're trying to find info on a topic and you don't know enough about it yet? So yes, you've got the academic journals also, very good. Government documents, correct. And yeah, we all know there's the internet, that's right. And I guess there's also, it wasn't my favorite option that they listed, but the dictionary or encyclopedia. So, and of course, an expert interview is another option too, yes. So just briefly about those, you can go to your library and find information and facts there. You could check out academic journals if you're willing to rise up to the challenge of reading that technical stuff. There's government documents that have been produced by our different government agencies. There's also declassified government documents that you can find in the public domain. There's internet research, but sometimes be careful because a lot of false and misleading information can find its way online, so you have to be able to distinguish the right from the wrong sources. You have your expert interview. If you have access to an expert, pick their brain, interview them. And then there's also just a dictionary or encyclopedia if you're doing like a very small bit of research. Oh yeah, I notice here that I might not have asked for the little attendance check. So in whichever chat that you prefer to use, go ahead and leave a comment. So I make sure that I've kept your records clear. Probably won't need them for any particular reason, but in case I do, it's a good thing for us to keep that up. So yeah, and the records will be kept on both. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing it in the YouTube live chat or in the Zoom one. Okay, now next, the CRAP test, perhaps an awkward name, but there's this 5-part listed criteria for judging the quality of a piece of info. So I'll let you guys get your attendance comments in, but whenever you're ready, let me know what some of these letters from the CRAP test stand for. What do we have there? Okay, C for currency, good. And then there's a few other letters too. Someone will tell me the rest. R for relevance, right? And then there's 2 letters, A, authority, good, Dawson, accuracy. And then finally we get to the letter P, good, Sky, relevance. What's P all about? One more, purpose, very good. Okay, so when you're looking at information, you check how current it is, how up to date and recent it is. That's one thing. Usually the more recent stuff is going to be a little bit better for current day research. The letter R for relevance, making sure that the information is relevant to your topic of research instead of unrelated to it. Letter A for authority, meaning who has presented this information and what kind of expertise, if any, do they have to discuss the subject. Is this a person with qualified expertise? Do they have the authority to weigh in and have a credible view? And then you've got accuracy, the second letter A. Is the information true, correct, factual? And then finally, letter P is purpose, which means why was the information created? Was it put there to, I don't know, sell a product, market something? Was it put there to generate a bigger following or gain more followers, or was it simply put there for public information and so forth? So knowing these points of info about research that you're looking at will help you to determine how much credibility to attach to it. Okay, and then I guess, did we talk about the War of the Worlds broadcast? Let me ask everybody that. Someone let me know. I think we did, but it's kind of, okay, good. So yeah, the War of the Worlds broadcast, there was this radio showing of a science fiction narrative on the radio back in 1938, and it depicted the case of Martians invading the planet Earth and taking it over. And some people tuning in thought that this was a news broadcast, and they got into a panic. So it just reminds us kind of that our social influences can shape the way we perceive the world. So we should be alert to the fact that sometimes our perception can mislead, especially when we have these external influences that can shape the way we view things. Okay, so now we're ready to continue from there with some new info. So the next part of the notes in chapter 4 have to do with cognitive and perceptual errors. Okay, so let me put that here. Okay, cognitive and perceptual errors. So our minds can make mistakes. We can make mistakes in the way that we make judgments, in the way that we process information. And to the best of our ability, we want to try and avoid making these errors. We're not going to ever be perfect, but one thing that we can do to improve is just know what the common errors are, because once you know what they are, then you have a better ability to kind of counteract them and to monitor yourself for these for the possibilities of these errors. So let's try and figure out what some errors in thinking and perception can be. So one of them, the first one that they mentioned, is what's called misperception of random data. And misperception of random data is just this. It's when a person thinks they can see order or a pattern in something, which is actually just random. Okay. A misperception of random data, and you see there the definition. When a person thinks that they can see order or a pattern in something, but it's not got order or a pattern, it's actually just random. So one common, I guess, easy example of this that's mentioned in the book is like, take the case of little children sometimes who look up at the clouds, and the creative mind that a child has will sometimes think, oh, I can see things, like I can see that cloud looks like an elephant, or that one looks like a giraffe, or that one looks like a submarine. And in saying this, they're associating something that has a more ordered structure to what is obviously just a random collection of moisture in the Earth's atmosphere. It's not like those clouds up there are the work of a artist who's painting against a canvas. So the assumption or the assessment that there's some kind of coherent structure to it is just applied by the brain. Now, why do we do this? Well, because the human brain hates for there to be an absence of order or meaning. And so sometimes the brain will supply order or structure to something which doesn't really have it in fact. Another example of this, I guess, could be um, have you ever heard of the Rorschach test? This is a test that's performed in some clinical psychology. They show, um, oh yeah, yeah, right. So I mean, we all do it. I guess it's not a problem, but in an innocent enough case like looking at the clouds, that's fair. But sometimes we do it in cases where there's a little bit more at stake. So the Rorschach test is these ink blots. They're provided to a subject by the psychiatrist, and they say, "Tell me what you see in these blots of ink." And it's just a random menagerie of scattered ink on a piece of paper. But people will look at it, and then that reveals things about their deep subconscious or their psyche as they try and tell you what they think they can associate with the random assorted images there. Um, I've heard people with certain kind of beliefs or religious principles, they say, not, in some cases you've heard people say, I can see the face of a famous religious figure in a discolored piece of toast or a tortilla, or like on the side of a tree branch where there's some markings on the tree. Of course, in this same case, this is assigning order to something that is not in itself designed to take on that appearance. And there's also such cases of this type of misperception when people are scared about things. So this is something I've experienced myself. So if you ever watch like a really scary film, something that's kind of freaky and scary, and then you're like walking afterwards to your car or something like that, and it's late at night, you might hustle to your car a little faster because you see like shadows and things cast about, and you almost kind of perceive them to be like a sinister type of figure. This is another case, perhaps, a misperception of random data. Little children, another example to draw on from them. If you've ever dealt with children, I mean, we all were children at one point. You probably can relate to the idea that sometimes when you put them to bed, they get scared, right? Because their creative imagination will start to assign meaning and order to the scattered, I don't know, shadows cast about the walls, or noises that they may hear, thinking that there's monsters or ghosts and things. So they're really burdening their minds a lot with this association of order in things that are actually just random. Um, Stress and fear can influence that tendency. So it's best for us to try and have an accurate perception of the world around us. Of course, it's fun to sometimes draw associations and things of that kind. But when we do it in real life, and when we make false judgments in real life, there can be negative consequences. So, to the best of our ability, we should try to perceive things as accurately as we can. Okay, so next I'm going to talk to you all about memorable events error. uh, yeah, so Gabriel, what you say is it's almost as if the world outside the stories we tell people is chaotic and unpredictable. Well, it is. It is a quite chaotic and unpredictable world. So is that a relief to the child, or is that something that's going to just scare him even more? I guess it is a little bit scary, isn't it? But what can we do? That's just the world. That's where we live. So next up, though, memorable events error. The memorable events error is when we do this. When we place more importance on something than it really deserves, but we do it just because it's something that is out of the ordinary, uncommon, or rare. In other words, memorable. So one places more importance on an event than it deserves, just because the event was uncommon. Yeah, so memorable events error. One places more importance on the event than it really deserves. Why? Just because it's not common. Now, an easy example of this that's mentioned in the book is okay. So with car crashes, you guys, if you drive or even if you don't drive, I'm sure that you understand there's car crashes happening and automobile accidents happening left and right all the time. You know, I commute around for work from Long Beach to Orange County, and it's hard for me to get through even like one day of driving without seeing somebody's car over in the turnout lane or the shoulder waiting for a tow. Some cases it's even worse, right? Like a total crash, total loss where the car is never going to work again. And we see that commonly. So the point I'm making is just that that's an everyday experience. It's pretty normal to see. So we kind of get used to it though. That's the thing. We see it so much that it stops becoming something memorable to us, and therefore we just don't pay much attention to it. But um, a plane crash, and an airline crash, that's much more rare. It doesn't happen very often at all. In fact, we've had some of the most safe years for air travel in terms of the planes landing for the last few years that we've seen in a long time. So it's just a very rare thing for airline to have a flight where a plane crashes. But if it does happen, we take it as a big event because it's out of the ordinary and it consumes our like news media attention, and it's like the top story of that day or maybe even week. So anyway, the point is that the plane crash is much less likely to happen. It's more uncommon. So we think more about it and we place more importance on it perhaps than we ought to. Whereas the very common and everyday event of a car crash, we start to file it in the less memorable category and we just don't think much about it. So let me ask you this. What do you think generally people have more anxiety and fear about, driving or flying? Yeah, it's flying. People fear flying more than driving, but maybe you've heard this said to you before. If you have, I'm just going to tell you again that the statistics show that mile for mile, you're safer in the air though than you are on the ground. Actually, automobile accidents are one of the leading causes of death in our country each year. So, the saying goes, and it's true, you're likelier to get hurt or killed driving to the airport than you are when you take the flight from the airport. But people don't seem to have their fear proportioned to what's likelier to cause harm. We don't worry about stepping in the car, but we get a little bit anxious and nervous about getting on the flight. So if we were not assigning concern to the thing that was just more rare and less common, then we would have the correct appreciation of the risks. So that's one example. Here's another one I can think of. Just on before I move on though, it's kind of funny when people fly. If you have loved ones and stuff, a lot of times they'll say to you, "Hey, call me when you land," right? And why do they do that? Because they think, well, I want to make sure the plane did land and that you're safe. But they never say, "Call me when you get to the airport." I just want to make sure that you arrived at the airport safely. I mean, they might do that, but for the most part, people fear the less common thing. But it's less common, so it's not happening as often. So if you just took the numerator to be total number of people traveling on this mode of transport, or no, sorry, total number of people who die on this mode of transport, and the denominator, total number of people that take it, the probabilities involved would show that flight is a lot safer mile for mile. Here's another case. A lot of people in our country, sad to say, we've had a big issue with gun violence over the last, while, but for sure over the past 20, 25 years since the turn of the new century, seems to keep getting a little worse. So like a mass shooting that happens from some kind of, psychopathic person with a big gun, that happens too often in our country. School shootings, public places, houses of worship, you name it. You've heard all these stories, I'm sure. Okay, so that's a commonplace, and sad to say, it's happening so often with such reliable frequency that we start to become used to that. We get a little bit numb to that. On the other hand, though, when a foreign national commits a terrorist attack against a U.S. citizen, that we pay a lot of attention to because it's actually just very rare. If you looked at the statistics once again, you'd see that the chances that you have of dying that way by the foreign terrorist attack is extremely low likelihood. That's one of the least likely things to happen, but you have a much greater chance of being killed by some domestic US citizen that just lost their mind and went crazy in a public place like at a Walmart or something. So, what are we changing all our laws, though, and bending over backwards to try and address the threat of? Not the domestic problems with gun violence we have, but foreign terrorism. I mean, we spend $1 trillion trying to prosecute wars far away because of the threat of foreign terrorist attacks, but they're not the likeliest thing to really kill us or harm us. So, we take for granted and don't do anything about something that becomes normal to us, even though it's much likely to cause harm. And something that's pretty outlandish and far-fetched, the possible harm that you face from a foreign terrorist, that's the thing that we will upend our whole civil liberties for, to try and address. So just, the case here is that we shouldn't just think of things as being important because they catch us off guard and they're uncommon. We should proportion our rational concern towards something with its likelihood of really happening. Okay, so let's go on. Next is probability errors. Probability error is pretty straightforward. It's like just when you miscalculate the odds or the probability of an event by a significant amount. So okay, second, just get this in the chat there. Okay. When we miscalculate the probability of an event by a wide margin, that's known as the probability error. And there's two different directions or ways that you could commit this error. You could commit it as an error of underestimation, so you think something is less likely to happen than it actually is. Or you could err in the other way of overestimation. You could think something is likelier to happen than it really is. Either way, that would be a probability error. One clear example of probability error that is mentioned, and it's mentioned in the book too, is the gambler's fallacy, or some people just call it gambler's error. All right, so let me try and explain that. With gambling, famously, people can lose their rational judgment when they're getting caught up in gambling. So, like a person may think that the way they should bet is determined by some kind of mystical forces, like this is the hot streak or this is the hot hand. To make the point clear, how about I ask you this? If I flip a coin right now, what would be the odds that it would land heads? What's the probability of that? It is 0.5, right? It's a 50% probability, because if it's a fair coin, there's two sides on the coin and one of them has to land, so it's 50-50. So let me follow up. Suppose I flip this coin and I flipped it 10 different times and it landed heads each time. What would be the chances that it would land heads on that 11th time? So I had 10 heads in a row, just kind of a random streak. Now I'm flipping it the 11th time. What are the probabilities it's going to land heads now, the 11th time? Well, no, Armand, no. You're getting it wrong. Maybe you want to think about it. I'm asking about the odds of the individual trial, the 11th one. What's the odds that it will be heads? It's the same. It's 50%. It's still 50%. So if you were thinking, well, heads is hot. It's been 10 heads in a row, so I better, if I'm betting on this coin flip, I better bet heads again, because 10 in a row is bound to be 11. That's an incorrect way of thinking. That's the probability error, because the odds don't change from flip to flip, from each trial to each trial. It's always 50-50. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, the law of averages, it can't be heads forever, so we're due to get some tails in there. Yes, true. But if you thought that it was more or less likely than 50% on the 11th trial, then you're confusing the likelihood of a series of trials approximating to 50-50 with an individual one. So yes, if we had like 1,000 different trials to flip this coin, then we would expect that over the long stretch of time, it should approximate to a 50-50 ratio. But that does not mean that in an individual flip, that any of the prior outcomes or future outcomes could possibly influence the current situation of flipping it. So to make this more relatable to actual gambling, I don't know if you've ever been to Vegas or you know much about this stuff, but like there's roulette, one of the games. And on a roulette table, there's basically two colors of the slots. There's red and black, and there's two that are green. And the two green ones are just supposed to Um, can we possibly cheat on gambling machines? I don't think so, Kelvin. It's not going to be easy to do that. There's setups that the house always wins. But what I was trying to say is, say you're playing roulette. You have basically it's 50-50 red and black slots with the two green ones to offset the numbers so that the house has better odds. Um, but look, if you bet red and you won, red slot came up, and then you double down and you bet red again, and you won twice. You should not start having this thought like, oh man, I'm on a roll, gonna triple down on red because red's coming up hot right now. Nor should you think, oh, it's time to switch because, after two, bound to be the other one. It's really just a 50-50 for the most part. Or if you want the exact odds, it's this odds. It's the number of red slots as the numerator and the number of total slots as the denominator. That's the exact statistical probability that you're going to get your red win. So, and Gabriel, what do you say? Only in the short term, it's better to bet all your money once than parts of it at several times. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of strategies that people can use to be a sort of more rational gambler. But I'm only using the example of gambling as a random example because I just want you to understand that that's a commonplace where people will make these errors in the judgment of probability. Foster, I was in Vegas recently, and the machines give you a hot streak tab with numbers who have come up more often as of recent. Yeah, so there you go. They're actually trying to induce the gambler's error in you so that you might make less rational betting decisions or maybe bet bigger and therefore benefit the house even more. So a smart person will be able to make these judgments correctly. I'll give you one other example of probability error too. Sometimes people assign like mysterious, like supernatural explanations to things because they think they're just so unlikely to happen that the only way that they could be explained is if something funny and like, supernatural is happening. But sometimes those judgments are made because the person is giving a wrong estimation of how likely the event was. So the textbook talks about this through the example of the, what do you call it? Like the sort of surprise phone call or the coincidental call, or maybe I'll call it text. So let's talk about this possible scenario. Suppose that you're thinking of somebody and you haven't talked to them in a while. You guys have been out of touch, but you just had a random thought about them. They popped up in your mind. And then what do you know? Just total coincidence, but wow, right as you were thinking about them, they actually what? What do you think will be the finishing of this little scenario? You thought of the person, you haven't seen them in a long time, but right at that exact moment or right around that moment, they just so happened to do what? Just seeing if you could follow the hints that I'm trying to lay out here. They reach out to you, they message you or text you, right? So you get a message from the person. And now at that moment, you might be thinking this, what is going on? Whoa, this is so weird. Are we like psychically connected? Like I think of the person. I haven't even seen him for like a year. And then right then they messaged me. There must be something weird going on. Like our souls are connected across space and time. Okay. Well, the reason the person thinks there has to be some kind of weird explanation like that is because they think, what are the odds? What are the odds? I would think of them and then they would call me at the same time. That can't just be explained unless something like that is the explanation. But they're actually getting the odds wrong because they're thinking that this is the least likely thing only because they have forgotten all the different times when they thought of such a friend and no contact was made. And you see, that's not memorable. That just goes down the memory hole. You forget those events because there's nothing special that happens. Now, this is something uncommon. So it kind of combines with the memorable events error too. So, the real numerator and denominator are not being correctly understood by the person who assigns this explanation to it. Because the true numerator is not just 1 over like a million or something. It's a bunch of things over the number of times that the person has been thought of. Gabriel, sounds like a lot of these stem from people's over-attribution and misunderstanding of meaning from chaotic events. Yes, that's true. And so that's one of the important lessons that we can take away as we try to apply this material to our own lives. Very good. Okay, so probability error, I think we've had a nice discussion of that. The next one to go into is what's known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, many people don't like to change. And, when random things disrupt the way that you've come to think, I guess it can be a bit uncomfortable, but, it's to your benefit that you adjust to the facts around you and you try and set your mind to appreciate them objectively. Because after all, you're the one that is going to be disadvantaged by having a poor appreciation of what's objectively true and by having a poor appreciation of the probability of that events will happen. Everything happens for a reason. I don't know. I've always said everything happens for no reason. But anyway, just kidding. A lot of things happen for a reason, but it's not everything. Some of them do, some of them don't. Next, I'm talking about self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so what the self-fulfilling prophecy is you expect something to happen, and because you expect it to happen, you somehow end up causing it to happen. Okay, so let me write that here. When one's expectation of an event ends up causing the event to happen. Okay. Okay, so self-fulfilling prophecy, when your expectation of an event ends up causing that event. Um, so there's a lot of examples. I'll give you a couple of them. One case could be like this. Take a student who they enroll in a class, and on the first day, before they've even done anything in the class, they just look at the syllabus, they look at maybe the teacher and their other classmates, and they're getting this kind of weird paranoid feeling. They're like, you know what? I don't know. I just have a sinking kind of bad feeling. I think this is not going to be a class I do well in. I just don't think this is going to be a successful class for me. So what they expect is to not do well. Now, if you expect to not do well in the class, then what kind of things do you think that might cause you to do from there or not do? Let me ask you about that. You're a student, so maybe you can relate to it. If a student didn't think they would do well, then how would they act going forward based on that expectation? Go ahead, throw it out there at me. Let me know. What do you think? Yeah, won't be as motivated to try. Yeah, why should I study? I'm going to fail anyway. So if you already expect to have this negative result, then why would you, attend all the meetings, take all the notes, do all the readings, do your best on the assignments? If you feel like it's going to be a waste and it's just going to be a failed result anyway, then you might withdraw from your best participation and effort. But now because you're doing that, not making all the meetings, not doing the readings, et cetera, you're actually making it so that it happens. The thing that you don't want to happen, but just because you expect it, now you behave in line with the expectation, and it ends up happening. How about in a case of like a relationship? You're with somebody, but you're starting to wonder, maybe they don't like me the same way as I like them. And so you have this expectation that maybe they just don't like you as much. Well, if you think they don't like you as much, and that's what you expect, or you think they'll break up with you, relationship will end, then what might you start doing? You might start withdrawing from the emotional connection in the relationship, or you might start to become a little bit more distant. And now the other person will perceive that, and they will say, "I wonder why they don't like, show me the same care, affection, and they're getting more distant from me." Eventually, leading to the breakup that you expected to happen in the first place. So, expecting a bad result will sometimes lead you to, even if it's subconsciously, engage in behaviors that produce the bad result. And yeah, not to worry, Foster. Thanks for letting me know. Not to worry. Have a good one, and you can always watch the video later. But appreciate the note. So you guys understand that example, the relationship one. It could also be in a social context of like you're going to go to an event and you're thinking, you know what? I think these people at the event are going to be all lame or they're not going to like me. I just think I'm not going to have fun. So you come in with that expectation, and then when you get there, you're like a little standoffish because the way you've expected it to go. And now everyone can kind of subtly perceive that, and so they're not going to engage with you that much. So you have the negative experience that you kind of expected to have. We could talk about it in sporting or athletics. You take the field for whatever the game is, and you get this feeling like, you know what, I don't think today's going to be a W for us. I feel like we're going to come away with a loss. Just look at the other team, and I just don't think we're going to have success. If you don't think you'll win, then are you really going to make the extra effort play or hustle your hardest? Probably not. You'd be like, oh, I'll save that for a more competitive match where I really think we can win. But now because you're withdrawing from your full measure of effort, it makes it likelier that you're going to have the loss that you expected in the beginning. Catherine, you say, is it kind of like the law of attraction? I mean, maybe are you talking about like you are like almost attracted to the negative result, and so unwittingly, without being fully aware of it, you make it happen? I guess you could say that, but normally people talk about the law of attraction in the sense of like people making relationships work together because they like really like the other person. But I'm maybe not 100% accurately understanding the meaning of the definition of the term. But I guess if it's in the ballpark of what I was just talking about, then I could agree. Gabriel, the power of perception is perplexingly powerful. How you think does a whole lot to change what you are or see. Yes. Combination of anxiety and pessimism. Correct. Here's two more, and I want to make these cases clear because they're not just about an individual's experience, but rather like a bigger social picture. So how about if everyone in society starts to expect that the banking system is going to collapse? So if people think that there's going to be a collapse of the financial sector, then what might they choose to do based on that expectation? Let me know. So you think the banking system will collapse and the banks are going to, fall. If that was your expectation, yes, then you would probably withdraw all of your money. Yeah, because you feel like the banks will not be able to guarantee that I have access to these funds if they, if they go financially under. So everyone then withdraws all their money. That's called a run on the banks. This is what happened in the Great Depression. But when everybody does that, what causes it to happen? It causes all the banks to fail and causes the collapse of the banking system. So once again, the widespread social expectation of this negative result led to the bad outcome simply based on the behavior from the expectation. I don't know. Say you're in a sporting stadium and some emergency causes everyone to rush towards the exits, and so we're getting into the case where there's going to be like a mass of people trying to exit and they're getting crushed. So maybe everyone's afraid of getting trampled in a stampede by people that are trying to rush out, and it causes them to want to get out faster before that happens. Now, everybody with the same thought process is converging on the exits, and it's happening. So everyone's fear of a panic is leading to the behavior that causes the outcome that they don't want. And one more. Suppose that you have two nations maybe that border each other. They don't really have to be on borders, but we could just use that as the example. So two bordering nations, and what they each think is going to happen is that war is going to break out with their border, the corresponding nation on the other side of the border. So they expect the outbreak of war. And if you expect war to break out, then what might you start to do in anticipation of that possibility? Well, you might start to man up defensively, do military overflights and other drills just in case the war breaks out like you expect. But because you're doing those things, they start to be perceived by the other side as provocative behavior that they need to defend against. And so now that escalates until the actual outbreak of war. So both sides expecting the result end up causing it to happen. So I guess the little moral of the story for us should be, don't kind of rope yourself into a negative result because you have a kind of bad expectation of the results before you've looked at the evidence. Wait for experience to tell you what's likely to happen. Because if you prejudge things too quickly, then sometimes you will end up behaving in ways that are not conducive to the actual results that you do want. Okay, so that's our self-fulfilling prophecy example. And there's just a few more definitions left over here for our chapter 4 notes. So the last couple notes or definitions have to do with social errors, as they call them. So these are also kind of in the realm of cognitive errors, but they have to do with the way we interact with each other socially in society. So the first one to mention is what they call one of us, one of them error. Now, one of us, one of them error is just this. It's when we classify and divide people into various groups of us and them, but then the problem is we show less respect and concern to those that we put in the other category of them. Okay, so okay, got it there. So the one of us, one of them social error. When we classify people into categories of us and them, and then afterwards show less respect to whoever is in the so-called them category. So human beings are definitely okay. Not to worry. Thank you, Ixta. Have a good one, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great day. But back to what I was saying. Human beings have a natural tendency, a natural kind of inborn drive to identify as members of various groups. We find our identity in groups. We want to assign ourselves some type of membership in various collectives. And that's a perfectly natural feature of the human species. We're known as the social animal, and I've heard some others argue that we are like a herd animal. We want to be a part of the pack. We want to be a part of a group. We don't want to be those that are isolated or set outside from the larger collectives that we could join with. So it's a natural human drive and desire to join with various groups to make up our identity. But it only becomes a problem, really, when we use it as a basis for dehumanization and disrespect for the people that are not within our in group. So I would love to supply some discussion with you guys by asking you, what different ways can we divide people up? Along what kind of lines? So how can we divide people into groups of us and them? We could do this on the basis of which kind of concepts? People can be divided into categories of us and them along race and class. Very good, Madeline. Okay, that's one place to start. Sky, you talk about politically, conservative or liberal, right? So yeah, race. You could say us, white people, Asians, African Americans, them, vice versa. Class. We could talk about the upper classes, the lower classes, financially, economically, the middle class. Political ideology, us conservatives, them liberals, us liberals, them conservatives, moderates. Religion, yes, of course, us Christians, them Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus. Popularity, Peter, I guess what you're talking about is like, oh, us, the popular people, them, the like sort of I don't know what's the word for a person that's I guess just unpopular. Good example, James. Age, correct, yes, us, millennials, them, baby boomers, us, Gen Z, them, Gen X, stuff like that. And let's see, emotional status, love or hate. Right, yeah, I guess, not necessarily though, Kelvin, because who are the people that you're talking about? Lovers versus haters? I don't know. It's not really a clear conceptual distinction. Sexuality, that's a certain one, yes. So you've got like gay, straight, bisexual, and so forth, all the remainders. Gender, man, woman, I don't know, intersex and other kinds of intermediate categories. A lot of gender categories popping up these days. So yeah, there's all these different divides that we can and we do divide ourselves into. Yeah, no, I think it's obvious sarcasm, but yeah, you guys are having a fun conversation there in the YouTube chat. Anyway, stan culture, us and them, based on things like music or shows. Oh yeah, so like us, the fans of this show, and them, the fans of a different one, or like sporting communities. People will even fight to the death sometimes over disagreements about their favorite teams or athletes. So anyway, back to the main point though. We should not look at people that are in other categories as somehow less than us, less worthy of respect or consideration or concern. It's a diverse planet and a diverse world, and it's certainly a diverse country. I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the United States, how much diversity we have. If you go to like Europe or other places, it's a little more homogenous in terms of the, I don't know, demographics of the countries. So we're never going to have a world where everybody looks the same, where everybody believes the same thing, where everybody has the same religion, race, etc. So, what we really should be doing is trying to build bridges to communities of others, because at the end of the day, we all have to live together. And as much as we have differences, we still are all human beings. We have the same genome genetically, and we all have very similar needs. So we have to be able to see a common humanity in others, because if we don't, and we just find ourselves only having any kind of fond feelings for the people within our own self-assigned groups, that can really tear apart the bonds of humanity and society. We've seen civil wars break out throughout history. Nations, families, friends can be divided by the different ways that we assign our membership in groups. So be part of the groups, be proud of the groups that you're parts of, but at the same time, let's not use that as a basis for like literal dehumanization of people in other groups. And so a few comments here. It's almost like a small minority, doesn't speak for everybody. Haha, yes. Sadly, some people still exist where everyone can't tolerate others for being different. Sure, we can't make everybody, I guess, morally or rationally enlightened, but the best that can happen is through the person's process of education and experience, they learn how to be better human beings, citizens, and treat their fellow human beings better. Okay, so that's the one of us, one of them social error. Um, and I also want to talk to you guys about two more things. So one is the diffusion of responsibility. So diffusion of responsibility is a concept where when we are in a group setting, no individual within the group feels any individual responsibility to do an action. And so what that causes to happen is that no action ends up getting taken at all. So let me write it down and then I'll discuss a little more. Okay. And an example of this concept that I will talk to you about, example given, Kitty Genovese. Okay. So diffusion of responsibility. You see the definition. In a group setting, no individual feels personally responsible to take action or to act, and therefore no action gets taken, even if it's an important action that's necessary in the case. Um, so an example that's mentioned about this that is taught often in these kind of classes is the case of Kitty Genovese. Has anybody ever heard about this situation? If so, let me know. I'd just love to see if anybody has a background on it. Okay, Armand, you know about it, Intro to Psych. It's also known as the bystander effect. So some people might have heard of it in that way of referring to it. It's kind of like that mob mentality, Gabriel. But so Armand, you've heard about the Kitty Genovese. Can you tell me what happened at all, or anybody, if you want? Kitty Genovese. So what did happen to this person? Anything at all? Just a few details, and then I'll add more to whatever you say. No? Well, oh, she was assaulted. Okay, good. Yes. Anything else? But what? Even though she screamed for help, yes. Didn't someone get injured in public? No one did anything? Yes, that's pretty much it. Okay. No, Sky, it's not that case though. If you're thinking about a volunteer in a room where a speaker was setting up, not exactly that. John, you seem to have it too. Okay, good. So I'm seeing all of the good comments coming in, and Armand, you've got some in the Zoom chat. Let me bring them together and just kind of give you the full details. So yeah, this is Manhattan, New York, and it's the 70s. And Kitty Genovese was just a woman who lived alone in a high-rise apartment complex. So, in those kind of buildings, there's a lot of neighbors, and the walls are pretty thin. So if someone's making a lot of noise, um, anyone can hear it that's around. So one night, sad to say, Kitty Genovese, some intruder got in there and was attacking her, right? And she's screaming out for help, and she knows she's got neighbors all around. So she's screaming to the high heavens, "Help! Help! Somebody come over here! Help me! I need help!" And like they say that 37, I think something in that range, people heard her. All her neighbors could hear her, but everybody's thought process was exactly what you said there, Armand. Everyone was thinking, you know what? There's a lot of neighbors here, so many people around. Someone will certainly intervene, call the police, do something. So I'm not going to lift a finger to help because I can hear the screams, but why doesn't someone else do it? Someone else will probably do it. But that mentality is so widespread that everybody had the same thought and nobody did anything. So she literally just got killed right there. And this case is mentioned in discussions of this widespread psychological tendency to defer action to other people when you think that you're a part of a group. Now, in this case, there was life on the line, but we see the same kind of stuff happening in less, pressing situations. Like, so as a professor, right, I'm teaching classes, and sometimes I ask my whole class, "Hey guys, who knows the answer to this?" or "Who can volunteer to say this piece of info?" And when you're in a class and you're that student, there's a big group that you're a part of, and so you can think, well, someone else will answer the question, right? Someone else will take the initiative to type that in. And sometimes that attitude is so widespread that you have to call on somebody. It's like, okay, so can you tell us? Because all the students are just waiting for someone else to take the initiative and act. Not to say you guys do that or anything, but you've probably seen this happen in the past and you know what I'm talking about. So in emergency situations, Sometimes I've heard emergency responders that are trained in how to deal with these type of cases, that you might have to delegate authority to people to break them out of their complacency so that they recognize that this is an urgent situation where they do have to act. Um, yeah, nowadays a lot of people will record things. I mean, at least by recording it, there's something of a record. I mean, that's better than nothing, I guess. But yeah, if you just step back, look at it, laugh, instead of getting involved to try and change the situation for the better, then that might be one good example of the bystander effect too. So yeah, groups sometimes blur our individual feeling of personal responsibility. The word diffusion itself refers to a concept from science, really, where a liquid can become more diluted as it enters into a different, like, body of water. So, maybe some of you guys have ever had coffee and you put like some cream in there. You see how the little drop of cream starts very concentrated, but then it diffuses through the glass, or a drop of ink in a glass of water. You would have the same idea. So in the diffusion of responsibility, you're like that drop. And when you go into the group, that's your feeling of responsibility dissolving out and becoming more diluted. So we sometimes have to maintain our ability to think independently as individuals, even when we are present within groups. So if you see somebody having a heart attack, don't just be like, I wonder who's going to call the police or who's going to perform CPR. You delegate authority sometimes. Hey, who knows how to do CPR? Do you? Okay, go over there, please. Help this person. Meanwhile, who has a phone? Can you call the police? Can you run next door to get more help? Stuff like that. Because sometimes people waiting for everyone else to act, waiting for someone to do something that's important or needed, and it just never gets done. Okay, yeah. And it's true that when you're in a big group, like a cult, as you're saying, Sky, you might feel like the actions of the cult are not your personal responsibility because you're just one member. So we have to maintain our own vigilant guard over our own individual responsibility in life. And so that's the point of the diffusion of responsibility concept. Now, I just have one more, and this last is the Ash experiment. Okay, see you soon, Foster. Have a good one. We'll have the review session on Thursday. So the Ash experiment is one more important social psychology experiment to add to our discussions of Milgram and Zimbardo. So the Ash experiment. This was done by the psychologist and researcher Solomon Asch back in, I think, late 50s. And so let me tell you about the Asch experiment. So what he wanted to study was the effect of conformity on individuals' judgment and perception. Like, how can being in a group influence the way a person sees and judges things? So here's what he said he was going to do. He brought in 6 subjects to participate in the experiment. But the thing is that 5 out of the 6 were coached by the researcher beforehand to cooperate with him to sort of play a trick on the 6th naive subject. So here was what they said they were going to do. Ash told the subjects, this is like a vision test, and all you got to do is match 2 lines in terms of their length. So I'm going to draw you like an image to show you how it worked. He said, I want you to take a standard line, and then I want you to try and determine which of these 3 comparison lines that it matches. So okay. So look here. Suppose that this is the experiment, and you see this here standard line. Now over here we have these 3 comparison lines to compare it with. And I have a simple question. Which one matches the length of the standard line? Is it A, B, or C? Let's see your answer. Simple 3 options. Which one's the same length as the standard? Okay. Okay, good. So I'm waiting for all the responses to come back. Seems like everybody says C, and I hope it's not too hard to see it. I mean, that's what I was intending. Gabriel, really? Well, I mean, look, it's supposed to be like very clear. Like A is much too long. B is very short in comparison to this. So C is the right length. Now, it seems like everybody would get the right answer, but the concept of trolling this thing actually is relevant, because here's how the real study worked out. They would tell 5 of the people, like in their secret debriefing before the experiment happened, okay, guys, when we come to you, we want you all to give the same wrong answer, but say it quickly and just like confidently, like it's the most obvious thing ever. So it's like person 1 through 5. It's like, which one matches? Oh, it's B, definitely B. Then you get to the 6th person, and the 6th person has not been coached, and so really they're the only one that we're really trying to study and see what their response will be. And the question is, will this 6th naive subject give the correct answer, which you can obviously just see by looking with your eyes, or will they give the same wrong answer that the other 5 subjects did, under the thought that that's the correct answer because everyone else gave it? And here again, we have results that are a little bit, maybe, I don't know, frustrating for some of us. The results were that 75% of the subjects that were the 6th person did give the wrong answer that matched the other people. Now you might be thinking, well, they must have known that it was the wrong answer and they just said it to kind of be nice or to not hurt people's feelings in the group. But when they debriefed them in the post-experimental interviews, a lot of them said they were very confused and they started to wonder about their own power of vision. They were like, how can 5 other people be wrong? I must be seeing it incorrectly. And so it actually had the power to kind of warp people's perspective on what they thought that they were seeing. So it's another reminder that within groups, we sometimes see things and perceive things differently as compared to when we're by ourselves. 100% of people give the right answer when they're not in the presence of 5 other individuals that gave the wrong one. So it shows that sometimes we don't even trust our own power of judgment, only because it's contradicted by the views expressed by others within a group that we're a part of. Yeah, I hope you guys see it. You just gave out the answer a little. Well, anyway, yeah, funny. So now it's just a funny game, right? Or it's not a game, but it's just kind of a fun, interesting experiment at the level of looking at lines and comparing line lengths. But imagine how this could have better or more important application in real life. Like, so for example, good point, Gabriel, yes. But I was going to say this. Suppose you're a member of a jury. You're a member of a jury. You're a juror. And the other jurors have all decided this person's guilty, but you're the holdout. And you're saying, you know what? I don't think that the evidence showed that. Are you really going to be able to stand your ground and say, I'm sorry, but you're all wrong and my judgment's different? Or are you, like the 6th subject in the ASH study, going to say, you know what? I don't know. I mean, how can everyone else be wrong? I must have the wrong viewpoint here. So, sometimes when you're within groups, you do have to think independently and break away from the judgment of other people. In this ASH experiment, not much is on the line. Well, they're lines, okay, another pun. But in real life, we sometimes are afraid to issue judgments that deviate from what we think is the mainstream of opinion around us. So conformity is a powerful influencer to human behavior. We have built-in psychological predispositions to want to not step outside of a group. And this plays out in so many different cases, including the ones shown by these experiments. So, I mean, that's really all that I had, I guess. We're done with all the content we needed from chapter 4. So what the plan is then is for Thursday's meeting, we'll definitely go into that study guide. You guys noticed that I sent the study guide, right? So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start filling in some of the topics and answers, and we'll come together as a group to go over all of it as much as we can on Thursday. So, I mean, it's a little earlier than 2:10, but I think we've covered the material in the right detail today. So I'm going to let us go, and I'll close these streams. But go ahead, feel free to say goodbye first. I don't like to just, let people go before we had that moment. So let me see that you're good. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your attendance as always, and I'll see you back on Thursday. If you need anything, just always email me, and I'll be in touch. So take it easy, and until next time, I'm just going to close the Zoom first. So to the Zoomers, take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Okay. And YouTubers over here, let me close you guys out next. So appreciate you, and I hope the dual format thing's not too confusing. I mean, you basically just get your choice. So I think that in a way, having more options can never be a problem. So hopefully it's working for you guys, and you like the recorded playback a little better because you got the chat in the new videos that I'm sharing. Okay. Yes, Zoomers, that's true. You're all Zoomers, right? But anyway, I'll see you guys later. So take it easy, and have a great day. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.